I haven't been on this couch in a long time. Well, actually, I've been on this couch all year, but I haven't filmed a video on it in a long time. I figured it should make a comeback, and now here we are. Hi, hello. It is literally Old Year's Day, as we say in the Netherlands. What is it? New Year's Eve Day? I don't know. It is Old Year's Day. Just gonna enforce that. The year is over in a few hours. This year I read 99 books. Am I going to listen to an hour-long audiobook later? Maybe. I have it saved in my library app. I just don't, it feels like cheating. So I might not do it. Anyway, 99 books, that's a huge, huge feat. I was reading a letter to myself from a few years ago where I said I'd read 26 books, and I was like, I never thought I'd be capable of that. And look where we are now. Honestly, reading that much hasn't been that good on my brain. I also noticed that most of the stuff I've read hasn't been favorite material. I only managed to select 13 favorites. Actually, it was 11, but I had to get 2 more. One more update before you dive into it, in case you're invested in my life and you've seen my last video where I wasn't on testosterone yet. I now am. It's been 3 weeks and a couple of days. So I have a top 13. It's not really a top 13, you'll see. The first thing I want to say is I want to give a huge shout out to the library, my local public library. I became a member in June. Before that, my reading, you can watch my mid-year wrap-up tag thing, and you'll see that I didn't really read a lot of bangers in the first half of the year. I wasn't really enjoying my reading as much. And then I joined the library and my reading spiked and I found so many new favorites. Well, as I said, there weren't that many new favorites, but like most of the ones that were favorites ended up being from the library. I feel like that's done wonders for my reading and for my enjoyment of reading, which is important. It's going to be a good reading year next year, I can already tell. I don't really have a top 13. What I have is a top 11 with 2 shout outs that I didn't want to fully include in the top 10 because they are very short Dutch audiobooks. I don't know how interesting that's going to be for other people, but I did want to mention them because I love them a lot. I'm doing like a countdown, but I just switched up something, so it might get confusing somewhere down the line. Anyway, the first one I'll mention is one that I listened to in the gym a couple of weeks ago. It's called Honden voor het leven, which means Dogs for Life, by Arthur Japin, the only man on this list, I believe. Yep. This is a very short book about a guy who is writing down all the life lessons he's learned from the dogs that he's had in his life. And he hasn't had that many dogs in his life, there's only 3, but the things that he's learned from them are just so sweet. It's just such a sweet book. I think it's directed towards children, but he does also talk about his life with his 2 boyfriends. It was just a very nice, warm little book, and I listened to it at the gym and I cried 3 times and it was quite embarrassing, and I probably shouldn't have done that. Anyway, the next one I wanted to mention quickly is De Groef by Maarten Wortel, which I have mentioned in another... I've actually mentioned all of these books because I've done wrap-ups the entire year, except the last one I read in December, which I haven't posted yet. Anyway, I've mentioned all of these books, but I am going to mention them again. I'm going to try to go a bit more in depth, but not on this one. It's about this woman who used to take walks in the park with her friend who also took walks around that park. So they used to do it together, you know, because that makes sense. And then the friend moves away, and so she takes the walk by herself and kind of reminisces on this friendship and on things that happened in her life. I just thought that her writing was so good and nice and warm, and I really, really liked it. I recently read another book by Maarten Wortel because I was curious about her writing, and it was also really good. It was Goudvis en Beton. I'm definitely gonna try to read more of her work next year. Those out of the way, let's get into my actual mostly English top 11 of books. Oh, this is where it gets complicated because I just spiked one up. Okay, let's just start here. This book, you're gonna see it coming if you know me because I have made a reading vlog about this book and I've never done that and haven't done it since. It's Big Swiss by Jen Bagan, which came out in the beginning of this year. I read it because Jodie Comer is going to be in the HBO adaptation that's going to happen at some point. No idea when. Since the book has been out, there has been some controversy around some problematic lines that are in it, and I recognize that that's true, but that doesn't take away the fact that I had a very fun time reading this book. I read it in like 3 days and I had a fucking blast because this book is wild. I will say this is quite unlike everything else that's on this list. It's unhinged women trope, but like ×2. I've seen this advertised as a romance, and I think that has done a huge disservice to the book and the reception of the book, because people who go into this reading it as a romance will be disappointed. This is not a romance as much as it is just two people being quite terrible to each other. But to what end? I thought the ending was nice and fresh and worked out really well. It is about a woman in her 40s named Greta, who is a sex therapist transcriber person. She transcribes sex therapy sessions for the therapist who lives in her town. So like all the people who go to this sex therapist, she knows all of their secrets, but she doesn't really know who they are, but sometimes she like has a clue. And then there's this one woman who she finds particularly intriguing, who she starts calling Big Swiss because she's Swiss and she's also tall. I actually don't know how she knows that before she's ever met her. But anyway, one day she meets her at the dog park. Also, one thing about me is if you're gonna write about dogs, I'm going to love your book. Period. She meets her at the dog park. They have a weird interaction, and their weird interactions just keep going. And then they fall into this romance that's really just like a very weird sex situation. I think that's the best way to describe the book. Do not expect a romance. I want to read you something. This is treacherous because I cannot read out loud, which is why I hardly ever do it on this channel, but you know, this is a special video. It's the favorites of the year. I kind of have to read something, so I'm gonna try. Ironically, I have picked a line that is kind of romantic. This is probably the only romantic line that is in the entire book. The rest of it is completely unhinged, but I really like this one. This is one where they're lying in bed together. Big Swiss's neck reddened, along with her chest. Her face was almost too beautiful to look at directly. It was like staring at the sun. Greta blinked and rolled onto her back. It dawned on her slowly, a little painfully, that what she'd been looking for inside the dream house, and what she'd found, was her own appetite. She'd been famished all these years without knowing it. Yeah, that was kind of sweet. If you want to know more about this book, watch my spoiler-free reading vlog. In the vein of dogs and writing about dogs, and if you write a book about dogs, then I will love your book, there is also this one, The Friend by Sigrid Nunez. I read this quite fairly at the beginning of the year, and I loved it because it's about a dog. It's about a woman whose friend commits suicide, and he was the owner of this dog, and she inherits the dog. The thing is, she lives in a very small apartment where pets are not allowed. Also, it's a Great Dane. Did I mention that? The biggest dog breed that exists. So now she's living in this tiny apartment, grieving her friend with this cow-sized dog who is also grieving and also very sad. The two of them, her friend and herself, were literary professors at I think a New York university, I'm not sure. So a lot of this book is about grief, it's about friendship, it's about writing, it's about dogs, and a lot of like fun facts about all of those things combined into a very sad little book. I think I read this quote on this channel before, back when I still used to read quotes. Innocence is something we humans pass through and leave behind, unable to return. But animals live and die in that state, and seeing innocence violated in the form of cruelty to a mere duck can seem like the most barbaric act in the world. I know people who are outraged by this sentiment, calling it cynical, misanthropic, and perverse, but I believe the day when we are no longer capable of feeling it will be a terrible day for every living being, that our downward slide into violence and barbarity will be only that much quicker. That's a friend. Now, I think we're at 9, and I'm not sure. I've messed up my own order of things. We move along. Like I said, a lot of the books on this list are library books, so I'm gonna have to look them up in this notebook where I wrote down all the quotes that I loved about the books. And the next book is The Department of Speculation by Jenny Orville. This book, I would say, is a portrait of a marriage from the moment that it begins to the moment that it somewhat maybe ends. Kind of an open ending. No spoilers. I mean, that's just the way that marriages go. I feel like they all have their ups and downs. It is a straight marriage. Weirdly, I enjoyed it nonetheless, and that's on good writing. Just something about the way this book was written in like very small segments with just beautiful, gorgeous prose, and also a lot of reference to other writers and other writing and things about love and writing and literature. You'll notice that's a pattern in the kind of book that I like. This book just felt very warm, and at the same time it was also kind of sad, but like it felt very nice and hopeful. And also there was some tone shifts with the way that the relationship changed, which I thought was really cool. Like the perspective changed. Like in the beginning, she's writing to you a lot, so that it feels like a letter, very intimate between these two people. And then in the end, he becomes he again, so you can feel that distance coming up between them. And it's so, it was done so well. I really like that. I'm gonna read you a bit that impressed me because it was fairly at the beginning and it was so sweet. It's a very short fragment that really doesn't have much of anything to do with like the greater picture of the book, but that little passage itself warmed over my heart so much that it was immediately a contender for the favorites of the year list. I learned you were fearless about the weather. You wanted to walk around the city, come rain, come snow, come sleet. I bought a warmer coat with many ingenious pockets. You put your hands in all of them. That is so sweet. And then on number 8, Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. This is the second one and the last one that is more plot than vibes. Although the vibes were there and they were nasty and I loved it. This is a book about a woman who photographs men and boys in like a kind of fetishizing weird sexual way, but it's all consensual mostly. Sometimes, however, she takes it a little bit too far. She is fucked up. She's fucked up. I read this book at a time that I wanted to read something about someone who was just vile, and I found that. I really enjoyed it. You know, sometimes you have these books where the plot just kind of grips you and doesn't let you go for a couple of days until you finished it. That doesn't happen to me that often. I'm not usually a fan of plot as much as I am of prose, as you will see from the rest of this list. In these cases of Big Swiss and Boy Parts, the plot was just so fun to dig into and to follow along. It was a crazy little book. I don't have a quote for you because there was nothing to write down in the notebook, but I just enjoyed it a lot, and so it's on this list. Number 7, I'm going to lose count at some point. Maybe I already have. Last year I didn't do a rating because it was too hard and I had 4 official favorites and then I just couldn't. But this year I had such a clear number 1 that I wanted to do a ranking. But now that I'm ranking them on the spot, I'm like, why did I do that? It's too late to go back now. So on either 8 or 7, Pure Color by Sheila Heti. This is a book about the world as the first draft of the world. I don't want to say much more than that because I think that you have to go into this one not knowing too much about it. One thing I will say is when I went in not knowing anything about it, I thought it was going to be about the world as like this green blob as presented on the cover. I didn't expect there to be people in it. However, there are people in it. They're not just people, they are gay people. Always love to see that. I think the quote I picked is pretty gay too. I picked 2. Being in love was just a fantasy of a world that was not entirely piss and dust. But what a fantasy Annie's face provoked. In some books, you're supposed to stay away from such a woman, but in other books, she is the one you are supposed to love. In life, there are no sure signs of whether a woman is the one you are supposed to stay away from, or the one you're supposed to love. A person can waste their whole life without even meaning to, all because another person has a really great face. When you are sad about the humans being gone, it's the art that you think of that won't be seen, not the humans, who maybe don't deserve to be here, because they are so killing. You have love in you, but that part is extra human, and that part is in the plants, and the animals, and the clouds, and the seas, and everything. What is lovable is not humans, but life, and life will always be here. I've seen this book described as kind of like a Bible, and I see that. This is a very thought-provoking book in like a really weird way, because it is a very weird book. I don't think Sheila Heti is a very serious person per se. That's a good thing in my book. I had something very insightful to say and now I forgot. We're moving on from 8 or 7 to 7 or 6. The Woman Destroyed by Simone de Beauvoir. This is actually a book of 3 short stories that are actually quite long. They're more like novellas. The only one that's actually short is the one in the middle, which was my favorite. It's called The Monologue, and it's this very long, rambling scene with almost no punctuation, no break stops, no paragraphs. It just keeps going and going and going about this woman who is standing by the window, pissed off that people are lighting fireworks. That's going to be me in a couple of hours when people are doing the fireworks non-stop, and I fucking hate fireworks. I'm gonna be that woman, only not completely, because she actually has reason to be very sad and angry at the world. And just the way that that monologue unfolds is so fucking good. That's what literature is all about. But the other 2 stories in here are also very good. I believe both of them are about a woman who's being cheated on. by her husband later in life when she feels like it's supposed to be just them from now on, just enjoying their pension and watching their children grow old. And it's like, why now? She just has a lot of questions and a lot of resentment and a lot of feelings about her own place in the world as an aging woman. The writing style of this book just worked so fucking well for the purpose that it was used for. I have to read more by Simone de Beauvoir, and I have to do it soon because I really want to. I have discovered the pleasure of having a long past behind me. I have not the leisure to tell it over to myself, but often, quite unexpectedly, I catch sight of it, a background to the diaphanous present, a background that gives it colour and its light, just as rocks or sand show through the shifting brilliance of the sea. I used to cherish schemes and promises for the future. Now my feelings and my joys are smoothed and softened with the shadowy velvet of time past. Should I mention the translator? Is this the first translated book that I think so. Translated from the French by Patrick O'Brien. It's translated by a man. Wow. Okay. There was another quote I wanted to read. I was there, and I was looking at the tiled roofs at our feet, bathed in the moonlight, looking at them for no reason, looking at them for the pleasure of seeing them. There was a piercing charm in this lack of involvement. That's a great thing about writing, I said. Pictures lose their shape, their colours fade, but words you carry away with you. Also, obviously, again, this is very much a book about like people who write and then write about writing. Then, at number 6 or 5. It's 5. Okay, at number 5. This was my original plan. I'm on track. On number 5, we have... Ignore the hideous cover, please. It's My Summer Without Men by Siri Husfeld. This cover... You know what? Just never mind. Don't look at it. This is a book about a woman who is also cheated on by her husband. There is a theme here. Anyway... She has a mental breakdown over it, and to recover from that, she decides to go to her hometown, where her mother lives, and just spend the summer with her. And to fill up her time, she teaches poetry to a class of preteen girls, and she also hangs out with the neighbor woman and her little girl. She's like 8, I think, 7, 8, numbers and me don't match. Basically, she doesn't see a man the entire summer, or at least doesn't talk to men the entire summer. And this is the product that comes out of it. A lot of interesting thoughts and a lot of theory, also a lot of writing, because obviously she is also a writer. A lot of like quiet reflection on womanhood, girlhood, gender in like this is gender non-queer sense, but still a lot of reflections on quietness and finding peace within your surroundings, but also yourself. I just thought this was such a nice, quiet book that also does have a lot to say. I watched back my September wrap-up, I believe this was, and I called this my Barbie. What the Barbie movie did for some of y'all, this book did for me. This is like womanhood, sisterhood in a nice, compact piece of media that has a lot to say. It's impossible to divine a story while you are living it. It is shapeless, an inchoate procession of words and things, and let us be frank, we never recover what was. Most of it vanishes. Time is not outside us, but inside. Only we live with past, present, and future, and the present is too brief to experience anyway. It is retained afterward, and then it is either codified or slips into amnesia. Consciousness is the product of delay. Oh, I just remember there's also like an old neighbor or like a friend of her mother's that she visits sometimes, who brings in some queerness after all. That's a bit of a spoiler. But anyway, I really enjoyed this book. It was very smart. It kind of reminded me, because that quote was very much about time, obviously. Jeanette Winton talks about time in the same way, many times in all of her books. It kind of reminded me of that. Now we're back on track. The next one was also from the library, Boulder by Eva Baltazar, translated from Spanish by Julia Sanchez. I remember that from the top of my head. Eva Baltazar is a poet, and it shows. Don't we love it when poets write novels? I do. I am planning to read that book in Spanish one day. I finished my first book in Spanish just yesterday. It was The Witches by Roald Dahl, but I did do that, and it actually went quite well, so I'm definitely going to be reading in Spanish more. I'll start with the kids' books though, but reading Boulder is a goal. Boulder is a book about a woman, a restless lesbian who wants to be free out in the world. So she becomes a cook on a freighter ship, travels down the coast of South America, then she meets a woman from Iceland, and they fall in love, and then they move to Iceland together, and then they have a child together. Well, maybe not so much together. You will get it once you read the book, and you should, because it's fantastic. I thought the nuances in this book of love and love crumbling apart slightly, and parenthood, the two different sides, edges of the coin of motherhood, there was a lot of interesting stuff going on in this book, and it was all written about so beautifully. I feel like it's hard to describe what this book did because so much of it was in the prose, and it was so good. I'm just gonna read you some stuff. I came here looking for true zero. I was tired of inventing resumes, of having to pretend life had a structure, as though there were a metal rod inside me, keeping me upright and steady. The destination always kills the journey, and if we have to reduce life to a story, it can only be a bad one. Right, this one also has a quote on time, actually. Pretty similar to the last one. Time doesn't live outside us, it comes into being as we do. To be able to hold time in our hands, now that's a human mission. This is one quote, I'm not going to read it because it's just too intense, but it's about... it's about fucking someone with a strap on. You cannot possibly imagine the most beautiful lyrical description of love that comes after that. Yeah. If that doesn't advertise this book, I don't know what does. There was so much in this book that was just so... Then, on number 3, we have, if you know me, you're going to see it coming, Art Objects by Jeanette Winston. This is the only Jeanette Winston that made it onto the list. I did read 5 of her books this year, but this is the one that really rocked my world. This is a non-fiction. It's actually a book of essays on art and literature. The first essay in this is where she describes how she fell in love with art, what her journey as an art collector and a writer and a literature lover has been like ever since. She has so many interesting thoughts. Jeanette Winston is my favorite writer. If you've been on this channel before, you know that because I literally never shut the fuck up about her. I have a tattoo of her, actually. This is her handwriting. She wrote this for me. I met her this year. So Jeanette Winston is my favorite because her brain is huge and she is so smart and she has such an eloquent way of putting her thoughts into words, and I just am obsessed with the way that she thinks. When I was looking for a quote to read y'all, there were so many options. I think I settled on 4. She reflects on a lot of other people's writing, obviously. It's again, it's a recurring theme in this video. She talks about Virginia Woolf a lot. There's an essay on Gertrude Stein in here. There's an essay on her own work in here, which I particularly enjoyed, but also about paintings. She's a lover and a collector of paintings. She talks about the influence that they have on them. She talks about how to consume art in a nurturing way in a world that doesn't prioritize art over money. She does not gel with capitalism, and neither do I. But also there was so much new stuff in here. I probably need to reread it at some point because when I read this, I was like, this is changing my world. I have to go to a museum right fucking now. And I didn't do that. And I feel like I should read it again and then do that. That would probably be helpful to retaining the information that she shared in here. A work of art is abundant, spills out, gets drunk, sits up with you all night and forgets to close the curtains, dries your tears, is your friend, offers you a disguise, a difference, a pose. Cut and cut it through. There is still a diamond at the core. Skim the top and it is rich. The inexhaustible energy of art is transfusion for a worn-out world. When I read Virginia Woolf, she is to my spirit waterfall and wine. Girl, you are my waterfall and wine. I didn't tell her that when I met her. I just told her that she saved my soul. Which arguably is worse, but anyway. It will give you what all art promises, a greater pleasure in the moment and a sense of permanencies. It is not time-locked, and it will unlock for you a history otherwise hidden, the history of the human heart. I know of no better communicator than art, no better means of saying precisely those things which need so urgently to be said. It has been a baton handed to us across centuries and through difference. It is an act of courage. This one is about how art has, well, it's about the healing power of art. That's literally, it says that in the first sentence. I don't know why. Anyway, the healing power of art is not a rhetorical fantasy. Fighting to keep language became my sanity and my strength. It still is, and I know of no pain that art cannot assuage. For some music, for some pictures, for me primarily poetry, whether found in poems or in prose, cuts through noise and hurt, opens the wounds to clean it, and then gradually teaches it to heal itself. Wounds need to be taught to heal themselves. The psyche and the spirit do not share the instinct of the damaged body. Healing is not automatically triggered, nor is danger usually avoided. Since we put ourselves in the way of hurt, it seems logical to put ourselves in the way of healing. Art has more work to do than ever before, but it can do that work. In a self-destructive society like our own, it is unsurprising that art as a healing force is despised. It's just so lovely to read things from people who are so fucking passionate about language and literature. There's also a whole essay in here about how important it is to pick the right words for the right things. Oh, it's actually this one. The question, what is your book about, has always puzzled me. It is about itself, and if I could condense it into other words, I shouldn't have taken such care to choose the words I did. The language of literature is not an approximate language. It is the most precise language that human beings have yet developed. The spaces it allows are not formless vistas of subjectivity. They are new territories of imagination. If you like art, if you like literature, if you don't like literature, honestly, why are you here? You just like me, don't you? Either way, read this book. My number 2, I don't have currently because I lent it to a friend, but it's Julian by Flo Piretz, which is a Dutch book, but it has been translated to English recently, so it should be out-ish in places. It's kind of niche. It's not out everywhere, I've noticed. My friend has been trying to order it for a while and it's just not coming. Don't know what's going on with that, but it is available in English in some places. If you're interested, go find it, but I should probably first tell you what it's about. This book is about the author, Flo Piretz, and her late wife, who were planning on getting married in every single country where gay marriage was legalized, as like a project to show people gay marriage is not legal everywhere. They were going to honestly do it. They had a whole plan, traveling with fundraisers and Kickstarters and I don't know what else. All the details are in the book. But then after the 4th wedding in France, Julian was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and 6 weeks later, she died. You can imagine this is the most devastating book you might ever read. I would compare this book to The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion, which she actually does write about in the book itself, except it's queer and it's a lot more in depth in the grieving aspect, but also all the things that came before their life together is very beautifully laid out in this book. It's every other chapter is about their life before, and then every other chapter is about her life alone after. It's so fucking sad, gut-wrenching. I don't think I've cried this much reading a book ever. I think what's most beautiful about it is that by writing this book, she's at least kept the project alive, but she's also in a way kind of kept Julian alive. The idea of it, it's so sad, but it's so beautiful what came out of it. I actually had the pleasure of meeting this author also recently. She's such a delight of a person. Yeah, it's a devastating book, but if you have the emotional capacity for it, definitely try to find it, because it's just so good, so beautiful, so loving, and made such an impact on me. The last book on the list, my number 1. I've screamed about this book before and yelled that it was my favorite book of all time, so if you've been around, you know what I'm gonna say. I present to you my favorite book of 2023, and possibly not just of 2023, maybe of a very long time to come. The word for woman is wilderness. Strange title, I know. This book, I think, is kind of like a right place, right time situation for me. I had top surgery this year, and ever since I've been craving like nature and wildness. I don't know if it's related, by the way. It feels like it is, but maybe it's not. I've been looking for books about nature and wilderness, but I didn't want to read about men in nature and wilderness because I don't care. So I stumbled upon this book in the library. I'd never heard of it before, but I saw the title and I was like, that book is calling my name. And it was. I started reading that book in the library, standing upright, didn't put it down, took it home with me, immediately kept reading it. This book was everything I wanted to read. This book is about a 19-year-old girl from the UK who is going on a mission to prove that women can live in the wilderness just as well as men can. It starts out talking a lot about how women in wilderness are seen as like these wild, crazy women who have tapped into like some weird mystical wildness that is barely human anymore, whereas when men go into nature, that's like the most manly and the coolest thing to do. It's a lot about how women are seen as like kind of the bedrock of society. Like women are societal creatures who need social comforts, and men are these natural people that need to be alone in the woods, undisturbed. And if women would do that, they would go insane. It deals with a lot of prejudice on that front. So she goes out to prove that that is not the case, and women can do that, and women should do that, and women we'll be good at it. Women are natural, organic human beings too. But again, she is 19, she has a lot to learn about the world, but also she is very smart, or either way, this writer is very smart, because there are so many facts in this book, not just about wildness and nature and women in juxtaposition to that, but also about space, many different cultures, many different animals. I guess that's nature. There's also a lot in here about the Unabomber and about the Cold War and science. There's just so much in here. This woman's brain, I have never heard of her. I don't know if she's written anything else. I haven't even looked her up. I don't know who she is, but she's very smart and she's written a very big book. Well, it's not actually, it's only 300 pages, but it feels like a lot more. It's just such a smart book with so many smart facts about so many interesting things. The conclusion of this did something to me. I finished this book crying because I was so invested. I was involved with this book. In the video that I talked about this book, my July wrap-up, I believe, I said I was in love with this book, and I do not take it back because I remember how I felt finishing it. It was almost devastating, but like in a beautiful way. And if you read the end of this book, I think you'll get what I mean, even if you don't feel the same way, because she describes the exact feeling that I had. I hope this kind of brings the vibe across to you of why I love this book so much. I think you have to read the whole thing to fully get it. And also you have to feel probably the exact same way that I did. After all, only the mountain has lived long enough to listen objectively to the howl of the wolf. Aldo Leopold said that. But man says I am civilized, and the rest is woman and wilderness. So what is woman? Is she where the symbols aren't? Is woman wilderness? Woman is wilderness, if she is the man's unwordable other. Woman is closer to the mountain and the wolf than man, even if only because he put her there. Therefore, woman can listen better than men, if not as well as the mountain, to hear the real howl of the wolf. That's a bit on where the title comes from. Here's another bit that I really loved. Everything looks happy and good in pink golden light, but the beauty has sadness, and sometimes this is difficult to distinguish from sadness itself. There is acute love for the thing when realizing that one day, one way or another, it will leave you, or you will leave it, or the light will change. But the magnitude of this hurt is itself something that adds to the beauty. You grow with it like inoculation, and the sadness comes in knowing that it is so other to you, that it is like the tree branches, growing first together and then apart. We need this acute sad feeling to make us care about the preservation of otherness. Perhaps then the feeling is more accurately the love of sad beauty, or nostalgia that hasn't happened yet. I don't know if like just 2 quotes can fathom everything that this book did to my brain. It was so incredible. It blew my mind. There was so much going on in there. Trust me, you will learn something new from it, no matter what your field of interest is. This one doesn't refer so much to literature as it does to science and history and space and all these very interesting things that I don't give that much thought to in my day-to-day life. But because of this book, I did, and I loved it so much. So yeah, that's rightfully my favorite book of the year. It's getting dark. I have no idea what time it is. My voice feels like it's dying. That might be true. I'm expecting my first voice crack soon, but it hasn't happened yet. Or maybe it has. I don't know if I will be able to tell. Anyway, these were my favorite books of 2023. I should put them in a stack and show them off to you because I always forget to do that. Here we go, thumbnail. All right, Happy New Year. I hope you had a good reading year. Let me know what your favorite book was. Or your top 3, or top 5, top 10 even. I don't care. I want some recommendations. Do I have anything to say about 2024? No, we'll see. I have one more recommendation for you. It's Stonebridge Blues by Leslie Feinberg. Didn't read it this year. I read it like 3 years ago at this point, but I think everyone should read it. You can actually only download this book for free on the author's website, which is great. But now, apparently you can also have it printed and sent to your house so that you can actually have a physical copy of it. And I actually might do that soon. That's my one last recommendation. That was it. I hope you had a good year, and I hope you have another good one. All right? Bye. In assistance, there we go. Jeanette Winterson. Diaphanous? Sure. I was looking at the title. Inchoate. I should stop making quotes with words I can't pronounce. I'm just gonna say inchoate and pretend that that's how it's said. There is the... Jesus. She doesn't use commas. That makes it extra hard. Fucking her with the strap on is like waking up summer and drowning in its own swelter. It's tossing her way up high and fighting the undertow that pulls me under before I give in to the quiet. For hours and hours, time drips off our bodies, trickles between our legs. We tack it onto the walls. I kiss her like I never knew I could kiss anyone, giving her everything I've held back for her while we were apart when she's not with me. You're just gonna drop that on me? That's fucking crazy.